59-year-old skipper George Patterson and 31-year-old John Burke left Sydney Harbour early yesterday morning in their 12-metre sloop Fang 2. But around midnight, 1 kilometre south of Port Stephens, they hit trouble. The Royal Volunteer Coastal Patrol received a mayday. Fang 2 was on the rocks and taking water. A search and rescue helicopter stationed at RAF Base Williamtown was called instead of the Westpac Lifesaver, which was in Sydney for a routine service. Police launch Abbott battled the heavy seas, but could only get within half a kilometre of the wreck.
Well, we felt that because they were taking water and the vessel may be sinking, there may be a situation where they'd have to abandon the ship, and it would be very difficult for us to recover them from where they were situated.
The weather conditions were just too bad to pull the men out, and rescuers had to hold off till first light. The yacht's crew waited for nearly 6 hours on the stricken sloop before being airlifted out. They were taken to Nelson Bay Polyclinic for observation, where they were reported to be tired but in a stable condition. Police believe it's unlikely the $100,000 vessel can be salvaged. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Following yesterday's bus crash at Swansea, in which 19 people were injured, Newcastle police were bracing themselves for a horror-long weekend on roads made treacherous by continuing rain. But after the first 24 hours of the 3-day Operation Care campaign, the officers' fears have been kept at bay. Although there have been 15 crashes so far this weekend, there's been no fatalities. The rush out of the cities to make the most of the 3 days off has not caused the usual traffic snarls. And according to Sergeant John Cook from Charlestown Highway Patrol, the 130 tickets handed out mark a drop on previous year's numbers.
This year we're down in numbers on infringements, so people must be taking care on the roads.
Sergeant Cook says the major worry uncovered by Operation Care is the number of people still drinking and driving.
As a result of the last 24 hours, we've had a total of 535 RBT tests, resulting in 35 drink driving charges.
Despite the early success of the operation, police say motorists still have room for improvement.
I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I just like people to take care on the roads and drive within the prevailing road conditions.
A good-sized swell greeted the competitors at Nobby's, and not everyone through the day was successful in staying upright. Those who didn't make it outside had a long swim back to the shore and terra firma. No reports of injury, though, helped organisers run a very successful final round, with the Aquatech Cup the feature event of the program. Heats and finals of the Cup provided plenty of spectacular action, and Torres Club proved the masters of the assembly, with slick crew work and picking the right line through the swell to pick up their patient and return to shore for the victory. Catherine Hill Bay was second in the Cup, with Coaldale third. In the overall point score for the day, Torres again was successful, with Coaldale 1 point behind on 18 points and Nobby's third on 15. Catherine Hill Bay and Manly also were in the goodies, winning a motor each for their clubs.
In another boating mishap, 5 men took a dunking when their yacht capsized off Crescent Head near Kempsey early today. About 3 a.m, a huge wave rolled the 11-metre Panacea, which left Sydney on Friday, headed for Queensland. The crew members, aged from 19 to 59, began swimming to shore and were rescued after spending about half an hour in the water. All 5 were taken to Kempsey Hospital, while locals dragged the yacht above the falling tide to prevent further damage. 2 crew have since returned to the Panacea to salvage equipment. The others are expected to be released from hospital later tonight. They said they'd tried to dock several times to shelter from the bad weather, but had found harbours closed because of the rough conditions.
They say there's no rest for the wicked, but even a person as decent as Jess Millington didn't get to put her feet up this holiday Monday. The 78-year-old from Belmont had every good reason to rest. She was one of 12 Hunter and Central Coast people named in this year's Queen's Birthday Honours list. Great-grandmother Jess has been awarded the Order of Australia Medal for her fundraising for disabled children and her volunteer work at Belmont Hospital's kiosk. But instead of opening the bubbly this morning, Jess delivered pies to the kiosk where she's worked every week for the past 20 years. Newcastle University Professor Max Maddock has also been recognised, becoming a member of the Order of Australia for his services to conservation and the environment. The education lecturer was at the helm of establishing the Wetlands Centre at Shortland. Professor Maddock says the award is as much a recognition of the environment issue as himself.
When we first began, there was that feeling that swamps were grubby places and that jobs before birds and a whole lot of very simple concepts. Since then, we've now found that we've got very strong public support, which indicates that a lot of people believe in what we're doing.
And an accolade for a man who put Novocastrians in touch with their seafaring past. Captain Ken Hopper has been awarded the Order of Australia Medal for his part in the establishment of the Newcastle Maritime Museum. While celebrating at a Nelson's Bay restaurant with his family today, the retired harbour master recalled he was nicknamed the Pirate when getting the museum off the ground.
We used all sorts of fair means and foul to get our collection together. We did quite a lot of near illegal things. In other words, we knew of something around the town that we wanted. We'd do everything we could to chase it.
Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Rebel leaders arrived for their meeting with relief agencies and diplomats, the first of its kind since power was seized on Monday. Heading the delegation, the vice-chairman of the EPRDF. Inside, hundreds of aid agency representatives waited anxiously to hear the new government pledge to help feed the 7 million people facing starvation in Ethiopia. The leadership promised full cooperation, including opening the international airport as soon as possible. Many in the hall expressed concern about the security situation in the famine regions, particularly in the southeast of the country, where bandits are at large, attacking relief deliveries. Afterwards, Mr. Ellis said they were facing a tragedy possibly as great as the famine of 1984.
If security is not brought under control there, you're going to get a very large number of deaths among the children in particular. And probably you'll see a lot of people fleeing back into northern Somalia, where there is nothing for them at the moment. So the potential for catastrophe is enormous.
Out on the streets of the capital, the rebel army remains vigilant. With each day that passes, the situation returns more closely to normal as people get used to the new government. Today, many more market stalls and shops in the city opened as people here slowly get used to the sight of rebel troops on most street corners. Here at the Salati Church, hundreds gather to pray for peace and an end to suffering. With Ethiopia facing the constant ravages of nature, people here are hoping that war, at least, is now behind them. Lindsay Taylor, ITN, Addis Ababa.
The Walls took a walloping at Raymond Terrace today as some of the state's best youngsters battled it out in the A.V. Jennings Junior Tournament. The locals were anything but outclassed, with Robbie Darlington using the home court advantage to stake a place in the under-19 final. He was beaten by top seed Brett Stefanowicz, but did well to stretch the state's number one. Similarly, Wyoming's Amanda Hogan put up a mighty fight against Sydney's Kelly Bolger in the 17s final. It took 5 games to separate the pair, but once again it was the Sydney sider who was victorious. Nelson Bay's Susie Rogers slugged it out with Institute of Sport prodigy Nicole Armstrong, but went down in 3 exciting games. Steel Curry's Heidi Mather and Charlestown's Natalie Smith made amends with strong wins. Meanwhile at Rutherford, some very special athletes gathered to scatter the pins.
I've got what they call macular degeneration. I've got no central vision. I've only got peripheral vision. So looking straight at the pins, it's like a black hole.
Kent won the Classic division, but with crowd support like this, there were certainly no losers.
Years ago, Andy Boundy erected this makeshift retaining wall to protect his property from the encroachment of Chinaman's Creek. If you hadn't put this wall in, I mean, what would be left of your property?
The laundry would have been gone because it was right under there and the council wouldn't come out to have a look at it.
Today the wall is still in place and Mr Boundy's property almost intact, but his neighbours are not so lucky. During the last few years, the creek has slowly swallowed half their block.
Every time it rains, it just comes up that quick. It's not funny. All the time. And if we're away or anything, Mum's here on range, you just got to come home. It's just too dangerous.
Newcastle Council has identified another 5 properties in the street threatened by erosion from the creek. Council says it does fill those parts of the waterway which become too dangerous, but this does little to ease the minds of residents. Do you reckon it's about time Council did something?
Oh, it is time, yes. All these houses along here are at risk. There's no doubt about that.
Admitting the problem is only getting worse, Council last night decided to dip into its Catchment Management Trust and try to rectify the creek's devastating path. More than $100,000 will be spent diverting the creek from the affected properties and another $10,000 erecting a concrete wall to protect houses in nearby Jarvis Close from subsequent flooding. But after all this time, residents remain pessimistic about its success.
All we can do is wait and see.
Ruby O'Sullivan is a woman who puts her money where her heart is. Today she presented the Newcastle University with a cheque for $100,000 to assist Aboriginal medical students with their studies.
I'm hoping that what I'm doing will give the students an opportunity to become doctors in their own right so that they can go back into the field and serve their own people, help their own people, because they're badly in need of help.
Ruby's late husband Jack was a very successful jockey and won the 1933 Melbourne Cup on Hallmark. She's now determined to put those dividends to good use and found a willing recipient in the medical faculty.
We've had some Aboriginal students withdraw from the course. Some have actually overcome their problems and come back into the course and have continued, but some have had to actually leave their studies completely.
Newcastle currently has 13 Aboriginal students studying medicine, with the promise of many more to come.
I think it's a really good idea, not only for the students that are in the course at the moment, but for those in the future. I think it'll be a huge benefit for those.
Welcome to the neighbourhood is becoming the catch cry for the Hunter and Central Coast, where the population is still growing as families leave Sydney and inner Newcastle for life in the suburbs. Local removalist Peter Shark says many families are following jobs.
Companies are not only relocating their offices and things, but also relocating their people into Newcastle, and I think this will have a very big effect on the economy as well.
The big winners in the population shift are Port Stephens, Port Macquarie, Maitland and Cessnock, which all recorded significant growth over the past financial year. The exception was Inner Newcastle, where the population fell. 800 people left the Newcastle municipal area last year, but researchers say that's not a case of owners selling up. They say it's a symptom of an ageing population. The kids are growing up and leaving home to start families of their own in outer suburbs. Newcastle recorded a 0.7% growth rate, but it will have to do a lot better to beat the Gold Coast, which is steadily growing and now challenges this city for the title of 6th largest in Australia. Can they overtake Newcastle? Only time will tell, but the Cooper's Lybrand report suggests that if the Gold Coast continues at its present rate, it will win the title in the first decade of the 21st century. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
Professor Vaughan Carr has spent more than a year studying the psychological effects of the Newcastle earthquake. The job is only half done, but all government funding has run out.
Now we no longer have the funds to continue the study in the way that we had originally planned, and what we're doing at the moment is limping along with funds from within the Department of Psychiatry.
Australia has never experienced anything like the disaster that shook Newcastle in December '89. Thousands were affected, and the shock lasted long after the tremors had stopped. Academics say it's vital we learn as much as possible from the experience.
It's important for us to undertake this research in order to identify these psychological problems, to measure them, and to learn how best to identify those people who are in need of counselling or treatment.
The university hopes to receive another state grant in the next financial year, but if that's not forthcoming, the Lord Mayor will consider using some of the nearly $3.5 million left in the Earthquake Appeal Fund to keep the study going.
Unfortunately, it showed up very, very serious things about our city, and we can't allow it to stop in midstream.
Professor Carr says it will take about 9 months and $70,000 to complete the study. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
Bob Martin impressed the Labor hierarchy with a strong result in last month's election. Port Stephens had been expected to be tight. Mr Martin retained the seat with a 14% swing. The former manager of the brackish waterfish culture research station at Salamander, Mr Martin appropriately has been given the Shadow Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. He replaces Jack Hallam, who has retired from politics. Member for Charlestown, Richard Face, has retained his portfolio as Shadow Chief Secretary and picks up spokesman for sport, recreation and racing. But in a major reshuffle, the member for Waratah, John Price, has been axed as the opposition spokesman for state development. On the other side of politics, the member for Gosford, Chris Harcher, has been chosen as the government whip. The whip works with the Speaker to help maintain order in the Parliament. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Unions vowed to pursue the Accord Mark 6 at a mass rally in May. Since then, most of the big companies in the Hunter, like Forjax and Ganninons, have reached preliminary agreements with the metals unions. Only smaller workshops will be hit by the 24-hour strike tomorrow. FIA President Maury Rudd says that in that respect, the Hunter is the exception.
Over the years, there's been a lot of industrial harmony built up in the Newcastle region, and they're well aware that the workers are entitled to a wage rise.
New South Wales Metal Trades Federation Vice President Frank Mossfield was in Newcastle to supervise a union merger. He says unrest will sweep the rest of the state tomorrow, but he believes employers are weakening.
Well, do you think it's going to have the impact that you want?
We think it will, because the Metal Trades Industry Association are very concerned.
While metal unions may have had a smooth road with most Hunter employers, the real test will be on Friday when they take the Accord terms to BHP.
Hopefully BHP will see sanity and agree with our claim, the Accord Mark 6, but the state wage case actually put a buffer there of $10, which is pretty palatable to most of the workers.
Scallops are a familiar sight locally on restaurant menus or from their shells washed up on beaches, but they're not commercially harvested here. The fishing industry south of Jervis Bay in Victoria and Tasmania depend on scallops, but the supplies have been drying up. Popular in Australia and for their export value, scallops are dredged from the seabed by trawlers. Biologists claim this process upsets the underwater environment, destroying future harvests. A natural parasite also affects the reproductive organs of adult scallops, wiping out future generations. These specimens were collected at Jervis Bay and now live in laboratory conditions. Scallops spawn millions of offspring each year. The microscopic spat are collected and, along with their parents, are fed a cultured diet of algae. The algae is stored in large vats. Bacteria levels are closely monitored or eliminated, in the case of these specially filtrated mixtures for young scallops. Dr Mike Heisman is in charge of the 3-year project, costing $300,000.
Well, assuming that we're successful over the next 3 years in being able to control spawning in captivity and to successfully larval rear and produce large numbers, commercial numbers of seed scallops, then that will allow us to do one of two things, or both of two things, which is either farming, specialised farming on long-line systems where the scallops are grown in bags subsurface in places like sheltered bays and so forth, or for restocking of natural scallop beds that haven't recovered from fishing or that have declined for any other reason.
Could that become a commercial venture?
Well, potentially it can. If we develop this technology to the point where our production of seed scallops is efficient and our costs are kept low, then yes, certainly we have the technical base then to either farm or to enhance natural fisheries.
Forty teachers and 1,200 students from Belmont High School and surrounding primary schools are taking part in the production. The theme is resolving conflict.
In the end of the show, the culmination is, I guess, that everyone does have conflicts, and if you reach out to people in friendship, there'll always be someone there to support you and uphold you.
Organisers are thrilled by box office sales. 4,000 tickets to the 5 performances were sold out weeks ago.
It was found that BHP breached its pollution control licence by discharging excessive waste between February 20 and April 21 last year. 7 times the legal amount of cyanide and manganese, 2.5 times the permitted amount of lead and 7.5 times the allowable level of non-filterable solids were detected by the State Pollution Control Commission, discharging from several drains into the south arm of the Hunter River. The matter went to the Land and Environment Court in Sydney, where Justice Stein said each of 7 offences was proved beyond a reasonable doubt. A spokesman for BHP said it was the first time the Rod and Bar division had been prosecuted.
So we of course want to be an environmentally responsible company, and we try to act that way. It's very serious for us to be both charged and prosecuted. We take it very seriously. It's not an acceptable thing in BHP to be operating outside the law, so we'll take that matter seriously.
Justice Steen will hand down his sentence on August 1. The maximum penalty for each offence is $40,000.